In Jerusalem, almost 2,000 years ago, Jesus was led like a lamb to the slaughter. The problem is that sin separates man from God. The solution was Jesus the Messiah, who was sacrificed for the forgiveness of sin so that the punishment of sin could pass over us. This is why the New Testament declares of Jesus, "For Christ our Passover lamb has been sacrificed." This is why each year in the springtime, Christians from all over the world travel to Jerusalem. Bearing multitudes of crosses, they make their way to Golgotha, which in Aramaic means the place of the skull. Marked today by the cross on top of this dome at Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But further to the north is another site that looks like a skull, which other Christians believe to be Golgotha. This site is known as Skull Hill or Gordon's Calvary. By far the oldest tradition is the one commemorated at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Christians have been visiting this site for almost 2,000 years, where they have never forgotten the place where the sacrifice for their sins was made, so that the wrath of God could pass over them. Is this really the place that Jesus was crucified? And what we're going to do is we're going to test the authenticity of this site through historical sources and archaeology. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, the information that I'm covering in this video is a supplement to chapter 8 in the book that I wrote, where God came down the archaeological evidence. Thanks for all your reviews. Thanks for making it #1 in archaeology. And I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy. Keep in mind also with the holidays coming up that it makes a good gift to give to others. I'll also leave a link in the description where you can leave a donation. We spend more money on these videos than we bring in, and so donations are much needed and appreciated. Even though the tomb of Jesus and crucifixion place of Jesus are next to each other, I already did a video on the tomb of Jesus, so in this video I'm going to focus on Golgotha. Mark 15:22 says, "They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull." The oldest commemorated site of Golgotha is located in the land of ancient Judea, in the city of Jerusalem, where about 1,700 years ago, the early Christians built a church over the place where Jesus was crucified. Many churches were destroyed and rebuilt on the site right up to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that currently stands over the same plot of sacred ground. So in the 1960s, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was excavated by the archaeologist Virgilio Corbo. And in his excavations, he found an agricultural layer. This stood out from the others because there was no architecture in it. It was a soil layer with the remains of what had been grown in that soil. He found the seeds of grapes and figs and olives and such things. This layer dated to the time of the early Roman period. And so this was archaeological evidence that the traditional site of Golgotha at the time of Jesus was used as a garden. This is significant because in John 19:41, it says, "In the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden." And so we have a correlation between the traditional site of Golgotha as a garden and the historical source from the New Testament that says that Jesus was crucified in a garden. In the 1970s, the Israeli archaeologist Naaman Avigad was busy excavating the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem's Old City. In his excavations, Avigad uncovered Roman streets like this one. Notice the building underneath the street level, so that once the street was removed through excavation, the remains of the older city beneath it was exposed. The Byzantine period is the period of early Christianity, which began in Jerusalem in AD 324. In Avigad's report, he shows a sketch plan of the Byzantine city. Avigad and his team excavated this section of the main street, called the Cardo Maximus. I'm standing in the old city of Jerusalem on the Cardo Maximus, which is depicted in this mural behind me. This is the main north-south street in Jerusalem at that time. And so this particular part of the Cardo Maximus that we see here that remains is an extension from the Byzantine period. Here we see the Byzantine Cardo being excavated by Avigad's team. This drawing of the Cardo from Avigad's report shows the pillar bases resting on the street level. Just as in one of his excavation squares, we see the remains of some of the pillar bases that reveal the street level of the Cardo Maximus. Underneath this street, an older city wall of Jerusalem was unearthed by Avigad's team. This city wall was in use in the early Roman period, which is the time of Jesus. As the excavations continued, two sides of the city wall were uncovered with a gap in between them, revealing a city gate. The AD 1st century historian Josephus wrote about the gate called Geneth, which belonged to the first wall. Was this the gate that the 1st century historian Josephus called the Geneth Gate? Avigad thought so because Geneth means garden, and gates were often named after the place where the road that passed through them led to. On Avigad's top plan of Byzantine Jerusalem, this is where he discovered the city gate. And nearby, he shows the original church built by Constantine at Golgotha. Avigad knew that at this church, the earlier excavations of Corbo had found evidence that in AD 1st century, this was a garden. It makes sense then that the gate leading to this garden would be the one called the Garden Gate. It was named this because it led to the garden that Corbo had discovered. Hebrews 13:12 says, Jesus also suffered outside the city gate. Therefore, what the archaeology demonstrates is that the church on the hill Golgotha was inside the much larger Byzantine city of Jerusalem in the early Christian period, while underneath this Byzantine city was a much smaller city dating to the time of Jesus, when the garden at Golgotha was located outside of Jerusalem. This means that the AD 1st century garden Corbo found in his excavations at Golgotha was accessed by the road that passed through the Garden Gate discovered by Avigad. This evidence then demonstrates the authenticity of the traditional site of Golgotha, since the New Testament declares that Jesus was both crucified in a garden and outside of a city gate. About 11 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, Jerusalem expanded to the north, bringing Golgotha into the city. After the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in AD 70, the Emperor Hadrian rebuilt it around AD 130 as a pagan city, which he called Aelia Capitolina. So this is the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who is the one who rebuilds the ruins of Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina. Directly over the top of Golgotha, Hadrian built the main temple for his new city. The early church father Jerome wrote, "On the rock where the cross had stood, a marble statue of Venus was set up by the heathen and became an object of worship." So over the spot of Jesus' crucifixion, Hadrian placed a statue of Venus. This is an example of a headless statue of Venus. We'll go over and look at a head from a statue. And here's an example of the head of Venus from one of the statues. It was a little less than 100 years from the time of Jesus' crucifixion to the time Hadrian came to the rubble of Jerusalem and chose a particular hill to put his main temple in the pagan city, Aelia Capitolina, that he was building. Why did he choose that particular place? Jerome gives the reason when he wrote, "The original persecutors indeed supposed that by polluting our holy places, they would deprive us of our faith in the Passion." He did it to pollute the Christian holy places. And this informs us that before Hadrian came there, Golgotha was a holy place of the Christians. It had been a holy place for 100 years almost. And that makes sense that is why then Hadrian chose the hill Golgotha to build a temple mount over and to build his temple on top of. After Hadrian did that, then there were two temple mounts in Jerusalem, one over the hill Moriah and the other one over the hill Golgotha. And a more specific question is then, why did he choose to put over the spot of crucifixion specifically a statue of Venus? And again, the answer is very clear. 1 John 3:16 says, this is how we know what love is, that Christ laid down his life for us. Where did he do that? He did that at Golgotha. So of all the places on earth, the place that most represents love would be Golgotha, where Jesus laid down his life for us. That was the greatest act of love. That was the demonstration of what love is. That defines what love is for us. That allows us to love others because Christ first loved us in this place where he laid down his life and died for the sins of humanity. And so to pollute that, to supplant that, Hadrian came and put a statue of Venus, the goddess of love, right over the top of that, where then the acts of worship, horrible things like sexual immorality and temple prostitution and these kinds of things were acted out right over the top of the very spot where God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son, who died in the place of the sins of humanity. When Hadrian built his temple on top of Golgotha, he had stairs built up the side of the hill. You came down the Cardo Maximus, you came up steps, and then the ancient original entrance was from the front. When we look down on the same area today, this is the line of the Cardo Maximus, and in between these lines were the stairs leading up to the temple on top of the hill. Some of these original steps and other structures were found through excavations and are preserved under these buildings. These preserved steps are roughly here on the temple model. This is the ancient way that you came up from the Cardo Maximus up to the temple that Hadrian built, and these elaborate structures that you see here are part of that entrance built at the time of Hadrian. In this next scene, I'm standing on the roof of the eastern end of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, next to this dome. So we have the dome here. Look at where it's located as far as where the Crusader Church is. We're going to be down there in just a few minutes, and we're going to be looking up at the dome like this, and we're going to be looking at the stairs that ascended up from the Cardo Maximus up to the place of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. So this dome is the one that we were standing next to up above here. And so we're now down underneath where the stairs come up the side of the hill to the place of crucifixion. And you see these stones here from the late Roman period. These are from the time of Hadrian. When Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, came to power in AD 324, he had Hadrian's temple destroyed and a church called the Martyrium built in its place to commemorate the spot where Jesus was crucified. This is the mausoleum Constantine had built over the tomb of Jesus, and this building is the Martyrium Church, with its western apse built over the place of crucifixion. Many churches commemorating this same spot were destroyed and rebuilt, right up to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that currently stands over the site, built in the Crusader period. When we fly over the current church and look straight down, we see that it is built in the form of a cross, with the dome of Golgotha and in front of it the half circle of the church's apse. Laying the top plan of the church over it, we can mark the center of the apse. This marks the place of crucifixion. Notice when we lay the top plan of Constantine's original church over the top of the current church, the apse is in the same place. In the original church, the apse pointed west, towards the tomb of Jesus. In the churches that followed, including the current church, the apse points east, towards the sunrise. However, the place of the crucifixion of Jesus, at the center of the apse, has remained the same to this day.
Underneath this dome, here and here, are the stairs that I walk up in the next scene, where I arrive at the outside of the church's apse. These modern steps I'm climbing are built over the ancient stairs, ascending the hill Golgotha to the outside of the church's apse here.
We have the apse of the church in front of me here. Now, the apse is what marks the place of crucifixion. Jesus was crucified just on the other side of this wall. Because of that, we have different masonry from different time periods. You can see they're on a different line from each other. So this is modern masonry. Then we have older masonry on a different line. Then we have a row of even older masonry. And then below it, we have this oldest masonry. This is because the church that was originally built here by Constantine was destroyed and rebuilt over and over again. And here you see the archaeological evidence for it.
After entering the current church, many visitors are led east and climb a set of stairs. These lead to an upper room, where they are shown a stone and told that this is Golgotha.
When you enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a lot of people go up the steep stairs up to an upper room and they're told that's where the crucifixion took place. This is not where the crucifixion took place. It's actually the architecture of the church that marks the place of crucifixion. And that, as always, is at the center of the commemorative apse.
On the east side of the upper room is a place for burning candles. When looking over these candles, you're looking into the real place of crucifixion at the center of the church's apse, marked with a crucifix.
This is the crucifix that marks the place of crucifixion. And this has been the same commemorated place through the earlier churches that have been built and destroyed there. What has stayed consistent is the specific spot that is being commemorated as where Jesus was crucified has stayed the same. The center of each apse of each church has stayed the same over the course of time. So it comes down to the reality today that there's two sites in Jerusalem that Christians believe are Golgotha.
The site under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that we've been talking about, and further to the north, the site called Skull Hill or Gordon's Calvary.
So I want to talk just briefly about what is referred to as Skull Hill, which is the hill right next to the Garden Tomb. So in 1842, a guy named Otto Thenius was the first to look at this hill north of the old city of Jerusalem, and he saw a skull in the side of this hill, and of course Golgotha means the place of the skull. Then later on in 1883, the well-known British general named Charles Gordon adopted this interpretation and popularized it. He also drew a skeleton over the rest of Jerusalem with the skull over this hill. And so this became really a Protestant site known as Golgotha, and many Protestants, evangelicals, believe that this is Golgotha today.
A common argument for Skull Hill is to first state that the New Testament declares that Jesus suffered outside the city. Then it is pointed out that Skull Hill is located outside of Jerusalem's current Old City Wall, while the Church of the Holy Sepulchre site is located inside these walls. This is an illegitimate argument, since we know that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre site was located outside of Jerusalem's city wall at the time of Jesus, since Naaman Avigad found the northern city wall and gate from this period in his excavations. What is also telling is that to this day, the oldest traditional site of Golgotha has a church built over it. This is where, archaeologically, we have one thing built on top of another over the course of thousands of years. In contrast, nothing at all has been built on top of Skull Hill.
There's no evidence, there's no archaeology of commemoration or desecration on top of Skull Hill that could even be excavated. In other words, what that means is that nobody believed that this place was the place of Jesus' crucifixion until 1842. It's pretty straightforward. The evidence for Golgotha at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is staggering. It is got one stack of archaeology on top of another, and from these different periods that have been found through excavations. You have to remember that Christians have lived in Jerusalem from the time of Jesus and his crucifixion until today. They are not going to forget, and indeed they did not forget, where Jesus their Lord was sacrificed, where he gave his life for the sins of humanity. That was why it was a worship place. That's why Hadrian chose it. That's why he was polluting it. That's why it was then again commemorated by Constantine and churches ever since. It has never been forgotten down through the course of history, because no sacred place is known better with more historical and archaeological evidence than Golgotha. In 1975, east of the apse of the church, excavations were carried out, and a very important inscription was discovered that years ago I got permission, along with a small group that I was with, to be taken down and shown this very important archaeological discovery.
In the next shot, I'm standing here.
So behind this door here is where the boat inscription is.
An Armenian priest named Samuel took us through a wall built by Constantine and down into the area excavated in the 1970s.
Now, technically, we are outside the church, and this quarry extends all the way to Golgotha.
We go deeper into the excavated chambers, where patches of wall and rubble from Hadrian's destroyed temple can be seen. On one of the stones from this rubble is the inscription.
Flagstone is drawn or graffiti of a boat. Underneath it says, Domini ivemus, O Lord, we go.
The inscription likely dates to the late Roman period, when Hadrian's statue of Venus stood on Golgotha above this area, and the boat probably represents the one used for travel by the early Christian pilgrim who drew it.
This is an inscription I've wanted to see for 7 years, and we've finally gotten permission. This is the oldest Christian pilgrim inscription that's ever been found. When exactly how early it dates to, we're not sure, but a lot of scholars believe it dates to earlier than the church itself. And what it says in ancient Latin is, "Yes, Lord, we will go."
What could an early Christian leave in an inscription on the side of the base of Golgotha with a ship that points away from Golgotha that says, "Yes, Lord, we will go"? Christianity is about coming. It's about coming to Christ. It's about coming to believe in him. It's about coming to the cross to receive the forgiveness of sins that he offers and the salvation that he offers. But after that, Christianity is about going. It's about going into all the rest of the world to take the message of who Jesus is and what he accomplished for mankind at Golgotha. And so to have this on an inscription, the earliest Christian pilgrim inscription ever found, to have this purpose of the church so clear, "Yes, Lord, we will go." That's how we serve the Lord. We go. After coming to him, we go and take his message to the ends of the earth. How awesome, how powerful, how profound is that? No sacred place is known better with more historical and archaeological evidence than Golgotha. It is a monument of evidence to the authenticity that this is the place where Jesus was crucified. It is so encouraging to us if you're willing to support the channel and hit that subscribe button. Also, keep in mind that this information is also covered in Chapter 8 of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. I'll leave a link where you can order that. Keep in mind with the holidays coming up that it makes a good gift also to give to others. I'll also leave a link where you can leave a donation. Donations are so helpful and appreciated because we spend a lot more money on these videos than we bring in. Also, you can watch another video right up here. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.